The lock made a soft little click, the kind you barely hear unless you're listening for it. But that morning, I heard everything. The rustle of the grocery bag in my hand, the wind brushing through the dead leaves on the porch, the faint hum of the refrigerator inside the house I thought I lived in. And the click, gentle, final, as if the house itself had decided it no longer wanted me there. I knocked once. Then again, harder. The sun was just rising, streaking pale gold across the siding, and for a moment I swore I heard humming inside my mother-in-law's voice, soft and tired, the same hymn she hummed every morning after her first cup of tea. That familiar sound gave me hope for a second. I shifted the eggs in my grocery bag, straightened my slippers on the cold porch, and called out. "Ma! It's me." Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked again, louder than before, the nerves in my stomach tightening like a fist. "Ma!" Still nothing until a shadow moved behind the curtains. I saw her silhouette, small and purposeful, shoulders squared the way she held them when she didn't want to be questioned. She was standing there. She heard me. She saw me. But she didn't open the door. She just stood still for a moment, then turned and walked away. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One quick vibration. A text from her. "Don't come inside. We need space. I'll explain later." That was it. No greeting. No apology. No explanation. Just that one message, delivered like a verdict. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I looked back up at the window. Her shadow was gone. The house felt suddenly enormous without me inside, like every wall had stretched out to push me further away. The door that she'd opened for me yesterday with a warm smile and a sunflower keychain was now shut. The same key she'd pressed into my hand with, "Your family, child. This is your home too," was worthless. My fingers curled around it in my pocket, cold and useless. What had I done? What had changed between last night and this morning? Why would she? A wave of dizziness swept over me, the kind that comes when your world tilts but nothing around you moves. The grocery bag slipped from my hand, eggs cracking against the concrete, yolks spreading like tiny suns. I stared at the mess for a long moment, the silence pressing against my ribs. That was the morning I realized something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. But the truth, the deeper betrayal, was already months old. I just didn't know it yet. Before that morning, before the locked door and the cold silence on the other side, life wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. We were getting by. We were trying our best. We were holding on to the edges of something fragile, hoping it wouldn't slip through our fingers. It all began with the job I lost. That day still plays in my mind like a scene I wish I could rewrite. It was a Monday, one of those grey, sleepy mornings where the sky looks like damp cotton and everyone walks a little slower. I had worked at the same dental clinic for almost 4 years, greeting patients with a smile, answering phones, organizing files, and occasionally calming down kids who were terrified of the dentist's chair. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I liked the routine. I liked the people. I liked having a place to belong. That morning, our manager called us into a meeting. Her lipstick was smudged, and she kept wringing her hands like she was trying to wash something off them. "I'm sorry," she said. "The clinic is closing 2 locations. We have to make cuts." Her eyes landed on me like she'd rehearsed it. By noon, my desk was empty. My little potted plant sat in a cardboard box next to a stack of sticky notes and pens that suddenly seemed useless without a place to put them. When Marcus came to pick me up, he didn't say anything at first. He just held my hand, his thumb tracing small circles over my knuckles. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "We'll get through this." I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But bills don't care about feelings. Rent doesn't pause for grief. Groceries don't magically appear because you're trying your best. Within weeks, our savings started thinning. Then thinning some more. Nights were spent sitting at the kitchen table, calculator glowing, numbers refusing to cooperate. I'd stare at job listings until my eyes burned, sending out resume after resume, each one a little heavier with hope, a little lighter with confidence. One night, Marcus set the calculator down with a long sigh. "We need help," he said softly. "Just for a little while. Until you find something again." I looked at him, already knowing what he was about to say. "Maybe we should stay with my mom." The words felt like sandpaper. His mom. Living with her. Sharing her space, her rules, her routines. I swallowed hard, trying not to let the fear show. "Just temporary," I said. "Really temporary." "Of course," he promised. "She'll be happy to have us." I don't know why I believed that. Maybe because I wanted to. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because the idea of staying afloat mattered more than my pride. When we arrived at her house that weekend, she opened the door with a smile so warm I almost felt silly for worrying. She pulled Marcus into a hug first, then looked at me with those sharp eyes that always seemed to evaluate before they welcomed. "You two come on in," she said. "I've been expecting you." She'd already set up the guest room, fresh sheets, folded towels, a little vase of fake tulips on the nightstand. She showed me the bathroom and said, "Now I cleared some space for you, but please keep your things tidy. This house is too small for clutter." She said it with a chuckle, but her eyes didn't laugh with her. I smiled anyway. "Thank you, Ma. We really appreciate it." She patted my arm. "Of course you do." Little things like that, small comments, wrapped in sweetness but carrying a quiet sting, became normal. The first few days weren't too bad. I spent my mornings on job applications, afternoons helping around the house. I tried to stay useful without being in the way. I offered to cook dinner sometimes, but she always insisted she had it under control. When I helped anyway, she'd hover behind me, offering corrections disguised as kindness. "Use the other knife, dear. That one's too dull. You're stirring too fast, let it simmer. Not that pot. It scratches easy." Everything I did was just slightly wrong. Not enough to accuse her of anything. Not enough to fight about. But enough to make me feel like a guest no matter how long I'd been there. Marcus didn't notice. Not because he didn't care, but because he grew up in that world. He thought her fussing was affection. "You two get along so well," he'd say, grinning. "Ma really likes you." I'd smile back, pretending the warmth I wished I felt. The days stretched into weeks. Weeks rolled into months. I had a few interviews, none of them panned out. The pressure in the house grew heavier, like the air was thick with unspoken things. Every night, I told myself this was temporary. Every morning, I felt less sure. Then one afternoon, something changed. I was folding laundry in the living room when she walked in, wiping her hands on a towel. "You know," she said, her voice unusually soft, "I've been thinking." I looked up, cautious. "About what, Ma?" She held out a small silver key on a sunflower keychain. "This. I want you to have it." I stared at it, confused. "It's the house key," she said. "Your family. It's time you felt like it." I didn't know what to say. My chest tightened with something like relief, like acceptance, like maybe, just maybe, I had misjudged her. "Thank you," I whispered, touched in a way I didn't expect. Marcus came in just then, and when he saw the key in my hand, he lit up like someone had handed him a trophy. "See? I told you," he said, kissing my cheek. "Ma loves you." She smiled at him. Then she looked at me, smiled again, but differently. Softer. Almost tender. We had a big dinner that night to celebrate. She cooked fried chicken, baked biscuits that melted the moment butter touched them, and even opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a good occasion. We laughed. We toasted. For the first time in months, I went to bed feeling like life was shifting toward something better. I didn't know that while I was sipping wine and feeling grateful, she'd already made up her mind about what was coming next. I didn't know that while I slept with that sunflower key on my nightstand, she'd already set in motion plans that had nothing to do with welcoming me into her home. I didn't know that a key can be given with a smile one day, and made meaningless the next. Because the very next morning, when I stepped onto the porch with a bag of groceries and a hopeful heart, she locked me out. Without warning. Without explanation. Without hesitation. And the truth behind it, the real truth, was much more cruel than a closed door. The truth was written in papers I hadn't seen yet. Papers she'd filed quietly. Papers she'd hidden carefully. Papers that tied the house, every corner of it, into her name alone. The house I thought we shared, the house she'd told me was our home too, was never mine. Not even for a second. I just didn't know the betrayal had already begun. It would take weeks and tears and confrontations and truths I wasn't prepared to face before I learned why she'd really given me that key. Why she locked me out. Why she wanted me gone. And why my husband stood frozen between the two of us, torn in ways I didn't see coming. But that morning, standing outside with cracked eggs on the ground and silence in my chest, I only knew one thing. Something had broken. And nothing would ever be the same. For a long moment, I just stood there on the porch, the early morning air brushing against my skin like a quiet reminder that the world keeps moving even when your life pauses. The yolks from the broken eggs were slowly spreading across the concrete, the thin liquid tracing small paths toward the edge of the step. It was such a simple thing, but watching them spill out like that made something inside me ache. I took a shaky breath and knocked one more time, not because I expected her to answer, but because I needed to hear my own hands trying. When the wood stayed still under my knuckles, when the door didn't budge, when nothing changed, the truth sank in. She wasn't going to open that door. Not for me. Not that morning. Maybe not ever again. I picked up the grocery bag even though half of it was ruined. My hands trembled as I walked down the porch steps, each foot carrying the weight of questions I didn't know how to ask out loud. I made it to the sidewalk before the tears came, hot, fast, quiet. The kind of tears you wipe away quickly so no neighbor sees, even though part of you wishes someone would ask if you were okay. I walked toward the bus stop, clutching the useless sunflower key in my palm so tightly it pressed into my skin. I wanted it to hurt. Physical pain felt easier than confusion. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard without thinking. I didn't have a destination. I just knew I couldn't sit on that porch another minute. The doors hissed shut, and as the bus rolled forward, I sank into the seat near the back, my grocery bag resting against my knees. I took out my phone and stared at her message again. Don't come inside. We need space. I'll explain later. There was no we in that text. It was all her. Her space. Her explanation. Her rules. Her house. Marcus didn't text me. I didn't text him. I knew he'd still be asleep. He worked late nights sometimes, and mornings were always slow for him. He wouldn't even know I'd left. But part of me wondered, did he know something? Did they talk last night? Did something happen after I went to bed? The thoughts twisted inside me like sharp wire. I closed my eyes, trying to force the bus's gentle rocking to settle the panic rising in my throat. I ended up riding for almost an hour, just letting the city pass by. Streets I'd never walked before, storefronts I'd never noticed, faces of strangers whose lives were simpler or maybe more complicated than mine. It was strange how comforting it felt to disappear into the world for a moment, to let the bus take me somewhere that wasn't filled with tension. Eventually, I got off near a small park. The grass was damp from the morning dew, and the benches were mostly empty except for a man feeding pigeons and a couple jogging together in matching sweaters. I sat down on the far end of a bench and placed the ruined groceries beside me. I stared at the house key again. The sunflower charm dangled from it, spinning slowly in the breeze, catching the light like it still meant something. Yesterday, she had put that key in my hand with such warmth. Her fingers had closed around mine like she was sealing a bond, and she had said, "You're my daughter now." I could still hear her voice, sweet and low, like honey poured over something bitter. Was it all a lie? Or had something genuinely changed overnight? I didn't know. But the ache of not knowing settled deeper in my chest than any answer could have. After sitting there for what felt like hours, I finally dialed Marcus. The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice thick with sleep. "Hey, where are you?" he mumbled. I hesitated. "Your mom locked me out." There was a pause, longer than I expected. A silence that wasn't confusion. It was something else. What? She locked me out, I repeated. I knocked, and she texted me saying she needed space. She wouldn't let me in. Another pause. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll talk to her." That was it. No panic. No rush back home. Just "I'll talk to her." "What does that mean, Marcus?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did something happen last night? Did she say something? Did you two talk about?" "I'll be home soon," he cut in. "Just stay where you are, okay?" But I didn't want to stay where I was. I didn't want to sit on that park bench while my life unraveled somewhere else. So I got up and started walking toward the bus stop again. By the time I made it back to the neighborhood, the sun was fully up, the street buzzing with normal life. Children were walking to school. Someone was mowing their lawn. A mail truck rattled past. Everything and everyone looked perfectly ordinary except me. When I turned onto the street, I saw Marcus standing outside the house. His hair was messy, his face taut with something I couldn't read. He was talking to his mother in the doorway. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression calm, almost indifferent. When they saw me, Marcus took a step toward me. She didn't move. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice small. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma said she needs some time. She said things have been tense." "Tense?" I whispered. His mother finally spoke. "Child, you've been under a lot of stress. I understand that. But we can't keep living like this. I need some peace in my own home." Her home. The words stung, even though she'd said them a dozen times since we moved in. "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice cracking. She sighed. "It's not about doing anything. It's about energy. And lately, your energy has been heavy. Heavy. Like I was a burden. A weight. Something she tolerated until she couldn't anymore." I felt a tear slip down my cheek, and I wiped it away quickly. "You gave me a key yesterday. And I meant it when I said your family," she replied. "But family also knows when to take a step back." I looked at Marcus, my eyes begging him to say something, to defend me, to stand beside me. But he looked torn. Conflicted. Caught between two loyalties, two women whose worlds he never learned how to balance. "Maybe Ma just needs a day," he said gently. "Let her calm down." I shook my head. "What about me? Where am I supposed to go?" He hesitated. "Maybe, stay with your sister today? Just today? I'll sort this out." I didn't have a sister. I barely had extended family in town. And he knew that. I swallowed hard. "Marcus, are you really asking me to leave?" I whispered. "I'm asking you to give Ma some space," he said, reaching for my arm. I took a step back before he could touch me. His mother watched us like a spectator at a show she didn't pay to see. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "Just for one day." Something inside me fell quiet then, not broken, not crushed, just still. A kind of stillness that comes when you're too hurt to cry anymore. "Fine," I said softly. I turned and began walking down the street, the weight of the sunflower key swinging in my pocket with every step. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how things had turned so cold so fast. But I did know one thing. Something wasn't right. You don't give someone a house key one night and lock them out the next morning. Not unless you're hiding something. Not unless a plan is already in motion. Not unless you intend for that door to stay closed. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. I walked aimlessly at first, then took a bus to the library because it was free, warm, and quiet, neutral ground where no one expected anything from me. I sat by the large windows overlooking the parking lot and opened my laptop, pretending to look for jobs. But my mind wasn't on listings or resumes. It was on the house. The locked door. The text message. The way she had looked at me without a trace of guilt. And the way Marcus had stood there concerned, yes, but also unsure, hesitant, almost as if he understood her side more than mine. I replayed our conversations. Her tone at dinner. Her smile when she gave me the key. Her silence that morning. The pieces didn't fit. Something had changed. Overnight. Or maybe it hadn't been overnight at all. Maybe it was the first time she stopped pretending. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Marcus. Come home. We need to talk. Not are you okay? Not where are you? Not I'm sorry. Just come home. I closed my laptop and left the library. The bus ride back felt different this time. Heavy. Like every bump in the road was nudging me toward something I didn't want to face. When I reached the house, Marcus was waiting outside alone. His mother wasn't in sight. He gestured for me to sit with him on the porch steps, the same porch where I'd stood that morning, confused and hurt. He exhaled slowly. Ma, she's been stressed. So have I said quietly. I know, he murmured. But she said she hasn't felt comfortable lately. She thinks you're unhappy. I lost my job, Marcus. We're living in her house. I'm trying my hardest. I know, he repeated. But Ma feels like she's walking on eggshells. The irony almost made me laugh. Marcus, I whispered, did she say something specific? Did she accuse me of something? He hesitated just a moment too long. She thinks you've been distant. And maybe a little ungrateful. The laugh came then. Small, sharp, bitter. Ungrateful? For what? For staying quiet while she corrected everything I did. For pretending her digs didn't hurt. For thanking her every day for letting us stay. You're tired, he said gently. Let's not fight. I shook my head. This isn't about tired. Something else is happening, Marcus. She gave me a key yesterday. And today she locked me out. That doesn't make sense. His shoulders tightened. Look. I didn't want to say anything yet, but maybe she's worried about the house. What about it? He opened his mouth to answer. But before he could speak, the front door opened. His mother stood there, her face calm, her voice controlled. Marcus, she said, I need to talk to you inside. He looked torn again, glancing between us. I'll be right back, he said softly. I watched him walk inside. I watched the door close behind him. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. The sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. My hands rested on my knees, my fingers tracing invisible circles as I tried to decipher the quiet coming from inside the house. Then finally, the door opened again. But it wasn't Marcus. It was her. She stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind her. And when she spoke, her voice carried a tone I'd never heard from her before. A tone that made my stomach drop. There's something you need to know, she said. And in that moment, standing on the porch where she'd locked me out just hours earlier, I understood something with absolute clarity. Whatever she was about to say would change everything. Her voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that makes your chest tighten because you know it's holding something sharp behind it. The porch light flickered above her, casting faint shadows across her face. For a moment, she looked older than usual, lines deepening near her eyes, her lips pressed into a serious line. I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. What do I need to know? She studied me in silence. Not with anger. Not with sympathy. With something else, like she was running through a list in her mind, deciding which version of the truth she wanted to give me. Let's take a walk, she said. A walk. At that moment. The request felt strange, but I followed her down the steps and onto the sidewalk. The air was cooling fast, hinting at rain later in the night. Streetlights clicked on in a slow wave down the block. She walked slowly, hands clasped behind her back, her sandals brushing the pavement with soft, rhythmic taps. I stayed half a step behind her until she stopped near the corner where the street split in two directions. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "This house," she began, "has been in my family for 37 years. Her voice was even, steady. "I bought it with your father-in-law when Marcus was still a baby. I kept it after he died. I kept it through every hardship. Through losing him. Through raising Marcus alone. Through struggling to pay the mortgage when times were hard." I nodded slowly. "I know, Ma." "No," she said, turning to face me fully now. "You don't know." Her eyes held a tight, guarded ache. "2 years ago, I almost lost this house," she whispered. "Taxes. Medical bills. Repairs. I almost lost everything I'd worked for. But I didn't tell Marcus because he would have panicked. I didn't tell you because, well, because we didn't know each other then." Her words caught me off guard. She'd never mentioned any of this, not once in all the time we'd lived under her roof. "I'm sorry," I murmured, my voice softening. "That must have been hard." She nodded but didn't soften. "I made sacrifices to keep that house. And when you and Marcus moved in, that felt like one more sacrifice. I was willing to make it. But I need stability. I need control of my own life." I swallowed. "I never tried to take that from you. Maybe not intentionally," she said. "But having you here changed the energy." The word again. Energy. As if I were a weight dragging their home into darkness. She clasped her hands tighter. "And yesterday, when I gave you that key, it felt right in the moment. I thought I was ready to share my space fully." She paused, breathing in deeply. "But last night I had a dream," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. "I saw my husband standing in the hallway, shaking his head. Telling me I was giving up the last thing I had left." I blinked, taken aback. "Ma, it was just a dream." Her eyes hardened. "Dreams are warnings." I stared at her, stunned. She continued before I could gather my thoughts. "And when I woke up, something in me felt wrong. It felt unsafe. Like if I let you stay, something bad would happen. Like I was losing the house all over again." Her voice cracked on that last line, but she quickly caught herself. "So I locked the door," she said, steadying her tone. "For my peace. For her peace. At the cost of mine." I shook my head slowly, trying to understand. "You locked me out because of a dream?" "No," she replied sharply. "I locked you out because giving you that key made me realize how easily I could lose control of my own home. That scared me." The sting of her words hit me hard. "Ma, I would never take anything from you." She exhaled. "I know that's what you believe. But fear doesn't listen to reason." I felt something inside me crumble. Not because of the dream, or the door, or the key, but because of the truth underneath it all. She didn't trust me. She never had. And maybe she never would. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "So what happens now?" "We need boundaries," she said simply. "I need space to get my mind right. And you need space to find your footing." My voice dropped. "You're asking me to leave?" "Yes," she answered, without hesitation this time. "For a little while." The finality in her tone was quiet, but it was solid. Unmoving. Not open to negotiation or compassion. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to break. When I looked at her again, she seemed resolved. As if she'd rehearsed every word. "Where am I supposed to go?" I whispered. She looked away. "Marcus will help you figure something out." "Of course." Marcus. The buffer. The bridge. The one who never wanted conflict. We walked back to the house in silence. When we reached the porch, she went inside without a word, leaving me outside with the fading light. Marcus stepped out a minute later, approaching me slowly. "What did she tell you?" he asked gently. "That she wants me gone." He sighed, sat beside me on the steps. "She's overwhelmed, babe. And I'm not." The words came out sharper than I intended. He rubbed his hands together. Look, maybe we should stay somewhere else tonight. I can get us a hotel for the weekend. And after the weekend? He hesitated. I don't know. The hurt sank deeper. Why didn't you defend me, Marcus? I did, he insisted. We argued for over an hour. But Ma's set in her ways. And when she gets scared. Scared of what? I whispered. I'm not stealing her house. He paused again, too long. That's the thing, he murmured. She thinks you might want to. My breath caught. What? I told her she's overreacting. But she heard from someone at church about young couples taking advantage of elderly parents, and then she saw you doing more around the house, helping organize things, and I guess she twisted things in her head. I stared at him, stunned. She thinks I'm planning to steal her home? I know, he said. It's crazy. But she's been anxious lately. And the dream made it worse. This wasn't anxiety. This wasn't fear. This was something else. Something calculated. Something rehearsed. Something she wasn't telling him or me. Marcus, I said carefully, has your mom mentioned anything about the house? Anything legal? He frowned. What do you mean? Like paperwork? Property taxes? Title changes? Anything? No, he said slowly. Why? Before I could answer, the door behind us opened again. His mother stood there, holding a stack of envelopes. Marcus, she called, I need you to look at something. He stood immediately. Coming, Ma. He glanced at me one last time before going inside. The door closed. This time, the lock didn't click. But I felt it anyway. The next hour was a fog. Marcus came back out eventually, saying he booked us a cheap hotel. We packed what little I had in the guest room, some clothes, my laptop, the toiletries she always made comments about being too scented for her bathroom. We left the house quietly. She didn't come to the door. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look at us through the window like she usually did whenever we left the house. It was as if erasing me from her home was as easy as closing her eyes. At the hotel, the room smelled faintly of bleach and stale air. The sheets were too crisp, the pillows too thin, but somehow it felt safer than her house had felt in months. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my suitcase. Marcus sat next to me. We'll figure it out, he whispered, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. But I felt nothing from that touch, not comfort, not closeness, not partnership. Just distance. A gulf widening between us. Did she show you something? I asked suddenly. He hesitated. Yeah, but it wasn't important. Marcus. He sighed. It was just bills. Tax notices. Old paperwork. Let me see. He looked away. It's back at the house. Why didn't she want me to see it? He didn't answer. And that silence was louder than any confession. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The hum of the hotel AC filled the room with a low, steady noise, but it didn't drown out my thoughts. Why had she locked me out? Why had she changed so suddenly? Why was she hiding paperwork? Why did she think I would take her home from her? Unless something had already changed with the house. Unless someone had told her something that scared her. Unless she had done something she didn't want me to discover. My heart raced as possibilities swirled. Had she transferred the deed? Had she taken out another loan? Had someone warned her about me? Had she planned something before I ever moved in? I sat up slowly, reaching into my purse. The sunflower key was still there, glinting in the faint hotel light. A key she gave me out of nowhere. A key she took away without warning. A key that meant nothing. But maybe it still unlocked something. Something she didn't want me to see. Maybe locking me out wasn't about energy. Maybe it wasn't about fear. Maybe it wasn't about dreams or boundaries. Maybe it was about hiding the truth. And maybe the truth was already written down somewhere inside that house. Somewhere she thought I'd never look. I lay back down, clutching the useless key in my hand, feeling the metal dig into my palm the same way the truth dug into my chest. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just tension. This wasn't just boundaries. Something darker was happening. And I was about to find out what. That night in the hotel, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that front door. I saw her shadow behind the curtain. I saw Marcus standing between us, his mouth full of words he didn't say. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on pretending. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, trying not to disturb him. The carpet felt rough under my bare feet as I walked to the small window. Outside, the parking lot lights cast long, yellow pools over the asphalt. A couple of cars sat crooked in their spots, and a truck rumbled past in the distance. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass. How did we get here? I whispered to myself. There are moments you can point to and say, that's when everything changed. But sometimes, it isn't just one moment. It's a slow drip. A gradual tilt. 1,000 small choices that eventually slide you into a place you never thought you'd be. I thought about the night she gave me the key. The way Marcus beamed. The way her eyes softened when she called me her daughter. I had believed her. Wanted to believe her so badly that maybe I ignored every other sign. Fear doesn't pay bills. I knew that much. Worry doesn't change paperwork. Dreams don't rewrite deeds. If she thought I was a threat to her house, something had put that idea in her head. And that something wasn't just a dream. I turned away from the window and glanced over at Marcus. He was sprawled across his side of the bed, one arm hanging off the edge, breathing evenly. The room's dim light painted soft shadows over his face. He looked younger when he slept, like the boy his mother always remembered instead of the man standing between 2 women. I slid my hand into my purse and pulled out the key. Metal against skin. Cool, solid, real. She hadn't asked for it back. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she assumed I wouldn't dare use it. Maybe she thought locking me out once was enough to keep me away. I stared at the key and felt something shift inside me, not anger yet, not revenge. Just a quiet, steady resolve. I needed answers. Not guesses. Not stories. Not excuses. Real answers. I slipped back into bed, not to sleep, but to wait. Wait for morning. Wait for a chance. Wait for a time when she'd be gone and the house wouldn't be full of her eyes and her judgments. The moment the sky started to pale, I gently shook Marcus awake. He blinked at me sleepily. What time is it? Early, I said. I'm going to look for work again today. He nodded, eyes still half closed. Okay. Text me if you need anything. He didn't ask where. He didn't ask how. He trusted my routine because he didn't know it had changed. I kissed his forehead and grabbed my bag. But instead of heading toward the bus stop that led to the library or the job center, I took the one that led back home. Or what used to be home. The bus was nearly empty. An older woman sat near the front, humming softly to herself. A teenager in headphones bobbed his head to music I couldn't hear. I sat near the back, the key in my pocket like a heartbeat. As we turned onto her street, my chest tightened. The house came into view, small, weathered, stubborn. Curtains drawn. Porch empty. No car in the driveway. Good. I stepped off the bus and stood across the street for a moment, watching. The neighborhood was quiet, the world still shaking off sleep. A dog barked faintly down the block. Somewhere, a lawn sprinkler ticked to life. I walked up to the house slowly, my footsteps oddly loud on the cracked sidewalk. When I reached the porch, my hand trembled as I pulled out the key. One breath in. One breath out. I slid it into the lock. For a second, I half expected it not to fit. Or not to turn. Like the house itself had conspired to reject me. But the key turned smoothly. The lock released with a soft click, the opposite of the one I'd heard the day before. This one was inviting instead of shutting me out. I opened the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of her home hit me at once, lavender cleaner, fried oil from last night's cooking, and the faint undertone of old wood. The living room looked exactly the same. The same beige couch cushions, slightly indented from years of sitting. The same crocheted blanket draped over the armrest. The same framed picture of Marcus as a toddler with a missing front tooth. Nothing had moved. But everything was different. I closed the door behind me gently, listening for any sign she might be home. No music, no clanging pots, no TV murmuring in the background. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the wall clock in the hallway. She wasn't here. I didn't have much time. I knew that. Guilt tugged at me. This wasn't my house, after all. I didn't want to snoop. I didn't want to become the kind of person who dug through other people's things. But I also didn't want to stay in the dark. I stood there for a moment, forcing myself to be still. I thought carefully about what I was really looking for. Paperwork. Mail. Anything about the house. My eyes drifted to the small side table near the front door where she kept her keys and unopened letters. A neat stack of envelopes rested there, as always. Her name printed over and over in black ink. I walked over, my fingers brushing lightly over the top envelope. Property tax bill. Water bill. Electric. Church newsletter. Then one caught my eye. A thick, official-looking envelope with a seal in the corner and the return address for the county recorder's office. My stomach flipped. I picked it up, my hands suddenly slick with sweat, and turned it over. It had been opened. The flap was sliced cleanly across. She'd already seen it. I carefully slid the document out and unfolded it. Pages. Several of them. Dense text, legal language. My eyes skipped over the jargon until a phrase leaped out at me. Transfer of title. The room narrowed around me. I scanned lower, line by line, until I found the names. Her name. Marcus's name. And then my name. But not where I expected it to be. Not as co-owner. Not as co-signer. It was listed in the previous section. The line showing the parties from whom the title had been transferred. My knees weakened, and I had to sit down on the edge of the couch. The document was dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. While I was still cooking in her kitchen. Still folding her laundry. Still smiling through her criticisms. 3 weeks ago, the title had been formally transferred out of both Marcus's and my shared ownership and into her name alone. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Time blurred for a moment. I blinked and read it again. A year ago, when we were struggling with our rent, Marcus had mentioned something about his mother needing help with the house. He said she'd invited us to move in and help with the mortgage, that we'd invest in the property together. That one day, the house would be ours. I remember the conversation so clearly now. We'll build equity, he'd said, smiling, like he'd finally found a way forward for us. It's better than paying rent to strangers. Ma wants us to have something one day. This way, we all win. We saw a lawyer. Signed papers. I hadn't understood every detail, but Marcus reassured me we had joint interests now. That our names would be on the title along with his mother's, giving us security. A shared future. And now, without a word, without a conversation, without even a warning, she had reversed it. The current document showed Marcus's signature. My signature. And hers. But the body language of those signatures was wrong. The scrawl of my name looked like the form I'd filled out months ago, when we first agreed to help. It was familiar. Something I recognized. But the date next to it was different. New. My heart thudded. Had they copied it? Had they reused it? Had someone forged it? My hand trembled as I traced the ink. No, that was mine. That was my handwriting. That little loop at the end. That slight slant to the Y. That was me. But I had never signed that document. Not in person. Not 3 weeks ago. Not at any lawyer's office. So when had she gotten it? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. There had been a time, a few months back, When she'd asked me to fill out a stack of routine forms, insurance, she'd claimed. Household paperwork. Nothing serious. I'd sat at the table signing here, initialing there, trusting her explanation because she lived and breathed that house. Because Marcus trusted her. Because it seemed easier than asking too many questions. Had she taken one of those signatures? Copied it onto this? Moved my name from one paper to another? I didn't know. Maybe I didn't want to know. But the result was clear. On paper, the house was hers. Completely. We had invested. We had contributed. We had believed her when she said this was our shared home. And she had quietly pulled the floor out from under us. My stomach twisted. I folded the document back up and slid it into the envelope. My hands were moving faster now, driven by a frantic calm. I needed proof. I fished my phone from my bag and snapped pictures of every page. I made sure the date was visible. The signatures. The official seal. Everything. My breath shook as I reviewed the photos. They were clear. Sharp. Real. I placed the document back into the envelope exactly as I'd found it and returned it to the stack of mail. I stood there for a few seconds, forcing my heart to slow. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second reminding me that at any moment, she could walk through that door. I thought about leaving. About slipping out quietly, pretending I'd never seen anything. But once you see the truth, you can't unknow it. And you can't unfeel what it does to you. I glanced down the hallway. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar. There was one more thing I needed to know. My feet carried me toward the room before my conscience could argue. The carpet softened my steps. The familiar smell of her perfume, white floral with a powdery base, lingered in the air. I pushed the door open gently. Her room was tidy, as always. The bed made. The chair in the corner draped with a neat, folded throw. The dresser top lined with framed photos and a small jewelry box. I didn't touch any of that. Instead, my eyes went to the small wooden desk beneath the window. A locked drawer on the right side. I knelt down. There was a tiny keyhole, scratched around the edges like it had been opened and closed many times. I straightened up and looked at the hook near her closet, where she kept her spare keys. House key. Car key. And a small bronze one I'd never asked about. I took it down, my fingers numb, and brought it to the desk. The key slid in easily, turned with a soft click, and the drawer released. Inside were more papers. Neat stacks. Labeled envelopes. A checkbook. A thin notebook with columns of numbers and dates written in her tight handwriting. The first envelope I opened wasn't about the house. It was about life insurance. Marcus's name wasn't listed as the primary beneficiary. Some distant cousin I'd never heard of was. I frowned and set it aside. The second envelope held what looked like an old will, with handwritten annotations and sticky notes stuck to the edges. Some notes were scribbled over names. Others had arrows pointing to crossed-out lines. The third envelope stopped me cold. It was labeled with the name of the lawyer's firm we had gone to last year. Inside was a copy of the initial document, the one that had added Marcus and me to the property as co-owners. I recognized it immediately. The weight of the paper. The order of the names. And then, clipped to it with the small metal pin, was a note in her handwriting. Old version. Corrected now. Protect house from them if things go wrong. The words blurred as tears pooled in my eyes. Them. Not protected for them. Not protected for my son and his wife. Protect house from them. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to stop the sting. So that was how she saw us. As threats. As risks. As people to be protected against, not cherished or trusted. My chest ached. I carefully put everything back where I'd found it. I locked the drawer, hung the key back in its place, walked out of her room, and closed the door. As I stepped into the hallway again, I caught my reflection in the mirror by the bathroom. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Eyes darker. Lips pressed thin. Shoulders no longer slumped under someone else's roof, but squared in a way they hadn't been in a long time. I slipped the sunflower key back into my pocket and walked out of the house, closing the door quietly behind me. I didn't lock it. As I walked down the street, the weight of what I'd discovered pressed on my chest, but underneath the heaviness was something else. Clarity. She had made her decision. Now I had to make mine. I couldn't force her to love me. I couldn't beg her to see me as family. I couldn't make her share a home she was determined to claim alone. But I didn't have to stay small. I didn't have to stay silent. I didn't have to let her rewrite our story without me knowing the pages had changed. Marcus needed to see the truth. And I needed to decide what I was going to do if he refused to. By the time I reached the bus stop, my mind had already made one decision. I wasn't going to be the woman who got locked out and stayed out without ever knowing why. If I was going to walk away from that house, I was going to walk away with my eyes wide open. Not as a victim, but as someone who finally understood what had been done to her. The ride back to the hotel felt different than the ride to her house had. Earlier, I'd been filled with uncertainty, nerves twisting through me like loose wires. But now, as I sat on the bus with the photos on my phone, the truth in my pocket, and a storm in my chest, the uncertainty was gone. In its place came something steadier. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of clean clarity that washed over me like cold water. My hands still trembled, but my mind was sharp. By the time I reached the hotel, the sun was fully up. The door to our room was still closed, still quiet, with that faint smell of bleach lingering in the hallway. I took a deep breath before opening it. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, elbows on his knees, staring at the carpet like it had answers he didn't want to say out loud. He looked up the moment the door closed behind me. "Where were you?" he asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I placed my bag on the table, pulled out my phone, and sat across from him. My knees touched his. His gaze flickered between my face and my phone, confusion spreading across his features. "Marcus," I whispered, "I went to the house." His breath caught. You weren't supposed to go back yet." "I know," I replied. "But I needed answers." He looked down again, rubbing his forehead. "Ma's going to be upset." I swallowed the bitterness rising at that. "Your mother has been upset with me for months. She just didn't say it out loud until now." He didn't argue. I tapped my phone screen, brought up the photos of the title transfer document, and turned the phone toward him. "This is what I found." He frowned, leaning forward. His eyes scanned the page, his expression shifting slowly with each line he read. At first confusion. Then disbelief. Then something far deeper, something like betrayal, flickered behind his eyes. "Marcus," I said softly, "did you know she changed the title?" He didn't answer. He kept staring at the screen, jaw tightening. "Marcus," I repeated, "did you know?" Finally, he looked up at me, eyes glassy. "No. I don't mean right now," I said. "I mean, 3 weeks ago. Did you know she took our names off the house?" "No," he whispered. "I swear to you, I didn't know." I watched his face as he said it. Marcus was many things: indecisive, conflict avoidant, loyal to a fault, but a liar he was not. He looked shaken. His voice crackled with something raw. I believed him. But belief didn't erase the truth on those pages. "She used my signature, Marcus," I whispered, holding the phone tighter. "My signature. I didn't sign that document." He blinked. "Then how?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. The realization crawled into the silence between us, settling heavily on both our shoulders. He swallowed hard. "She had you sign something before, remember? When she said they were insurance documents. You told me she had you initial a bunch of pages." My stomach twisted. So she had me sign documents I thought were for something else. And she used one of those signatures, he finished quietly, for this. Hearing him say it out loud stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. Betrayal never feels clean. It never comes as one hit. It comes in waves, each one sharper than the last. I let the silence settle a moment. Marcus, I said finally, your mother forged my consent. His face crumpled, fingers digging into his knees. I can't believe she'd do something like this. She did, I said. And she hid it. And then she locked me out of the house before I could find it. He squeezed his eyes shut. God. A long pause. Then, softly, I'm so sorry. I wanted his apology to fix something inside me, but it didn't. Not because he didn't mean it, he did, but because the damage wasn't something a simple sorry could patch up. What do we do now? He whispered. I didn't answer him right away. I looked down at the key still in my hand. That little sunflower looked so innocent, so sweet, so unassuming. The charm dangled lightly when I shifted in my seat, as if mocking everything it represented. She planned this, I said quietly. This wasn't fear. This wasn't panic. She's been thinking about this for a long time. He nodded but stayed silent. Marcus, I said more firmly, your mother didn't just lock me out. She erased me. On paper. Legally. She removed both of us from the property. His eyes softened when I said both. But she kept me out in a different way, I continued. She made you believe it was about energy. She made you believe I was the problem. He covered his face with his hands. I didn't know. I know, I whispered. I know you didn't. But the fact is, she chose the one moment in our lives when I was at my weakest to do this. When we needed her. When we depended on her. She used that. He dropped his hands, his voice raw. You think she hates you? I think she fears losing the only thing she has left, I replied. And somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that I, maybe even both of us, were threats to that. He swallowed hard. Do you hate her? He asked quietly. I paused, considering the question. No, I said honestly. Hate would be easier than this. What I feel is disappointment. Deep disappointment. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it quickly, but I saw it. And something inside me softened, even in the midst of everything. This wasn't just my betrayal. It was his too. His mother wasn't the woman he thought she was. He'd lived in a world where she was always right, always rational, always loving. It was a shock to see any parent in their full human imperfection. I reached out and took his hand. Marcus, we're in this together. But we need to be honest with each other now. Completely honest. He nodded, gripping my hand like he was afraid I'd disappear. I want to fix this, he whispered. Tell me what to do. For the first time since this all began, the question landed in the right place, not in pleading weakness, but in partnership. I took a breath. First, I said, we need to talk to someone legal. Someone not connected to her. We need to know exactly what she did and what our rights are. He nodded. Okay. And Marcus, I added softly, we need to move out of that house. Fully. Permanently. We can't go back. His eyes widened, but he didn't argue. You're right, he whispered. We can't. I squeezed his hand gently. This won't be easy. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen in months, certainty. But we'll figure it out, he said. It felt like the first real step forward. We spent the next hour looking up local attorneys, writing down names, trying to figure out which ones handled property disputes. Marcus made coffee using the old machine in the hotel room. It tasted bitter and metallic, but we drank it anyway, letting it ground us, letting it remind us that our life was changing whether we liked it or not. Eventually, he stood and put his hands on my shoulders. We'll get through this, he said softly. Not like a promise. Not like a hope. But like a conviction. I nodded. We will. But deep inside, I knew something else too. His mother wasn't going to let this go quietly. When she realized I'd been in her house. When she realized we'd found the paperwork. When she realized the door she'd locked had opened again. There would be consequences. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of them. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of her. Because knowledge changes you. Truth steadies you. And betrayal clarifies who you are at your core. As the morning sunlight crept across the hotel room carpet, illuminating the small suitcase on the floor and the wrinkled bedspread, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Strength. A quiet, steady strength. The kind that comes not from fighting, but from finally seeing clearly. I didn't know how the confrontation with his mother would unfold. I didn't know what the legal steps would be. I didn't know how our relationship would weather the storm that was sure to come. But I knew this. I wasn't going to be locked out of my own life. Not again. Not ever. The next morning came too quickly. I barely slept, drifting in and out of restless dreams that carried pieces of her voice, the slam of a door, the weight of a signature I didn't remember giving. When daylight slipped through the hotel curtains, thin and pale, I felt like I'd lived 3 lives overnight. Marcus was awake before me. He sat in the corner chair, elbows on his knees, staring at his phone with a look that said he was fighting a dozen thoughts at once. When he heard me shift, he looked up. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." For a moment, we just looked at each other, the air heavy with everything that had changed in just 24 hours. Then he cleared his throat. "I called one of the attorneys on the list," he said. "Left a message. Their office opens at 9. They might call back soon." I nodded. The effort he was making meant more to me than he'd probably realized. "And my mom," he hesitated, "she called me twice." My chest tightened. "What did she say?" I didn't pick up. I swallowed. Part of me was relieved. Part of me wished he had, just so we could know where she stood now. "She's not going to let this go," I whispered. "I know," he said, rubbing his forehead. "But we're not going back there. Not until we figure this out." I nodded, grateful for the firmness in his voice. It wasn't his usual softness. Something in him was shifting too, and I could feel it. We spent the early morning in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. The tiny hotel coffee maker sputtered and hissed as it brewed, the scent of burnt grounds filled the room. The world outside moved on like any other morning, cars humming on the freeway, people heading to work, doors opening and closing. At 9:30, his phone rang. Marcus and I both jumped. He answered immediately. "Hello. Yes, this is Marcus." I watched his face closely. His eyes narrowed, then widened, then settled into a serious, focused expression. He nodded as he listened, occasionally glancing at me. "Yes, that works. We can be there by 11. Thank you." He ended the call and exhaled. "They can see us today." A knot loosened in my chest, replaced by a nervous anticipation. This was real now. Serious. It wasn't just about being locked out, it was about what had been done behind closed doors, in secret, with paperwork she never intended for us to question. Marcus put on his shoes. "We'll go together. And whatever they say, we'll face it." I touched his arm gently. "Thank you for standing with me." He didn't say anything, he just kissed the side of my forehead, lingering there like he needed that moment to gather strength. The attorney's office was on the 3rd floor of a beige building that looked like it had been a dentist's office in a previous life. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and old carpet. A potted plant in the corner leaned toward the window, desperate for sunlight. A receptionist greeted us kindly, offering water we declined. It wasn't long before we were called in. The attorney was an older woman with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled into a bun. She introduced herself as Ms. Harrington and gestured for us to sit. "What brings you in today?" she asked, folding her hands on the desk. I looked at Marcus, then back at her. "We believe someone transferred property ownership without our proper consent," I said carefully. "And possibly forged or reused signatures in a misleading way." Ms. Harrington nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Let's take a look." I handed her the photos on my phone. She slipped on a pair of reading glasses and studied them one by one. Her eyes moved quickly, back and forth between the pages. After a few minutes, she set the phone down and leaned back in her chair. How long have you been living in this home? About 6 months, I replied. And you were originally added to the title? Yes, Marcus answered. We signed the documents last year. She tapped her pen lightly against her desk. You say you didn't sign this new transfer? No, I said firmly. I did not. She nodded. Well, I can tell you this. What I'm seeing here raises questions. Serious questions. My pulse quickened. Like what? Well, Ms. Harrington said, choosing her words carefully, it appears the signature might match your handwriting, but not your actual signing style from the previous documents. Sometimes when people copy signatures or repurpose them from other forms, the pressure, angle, or ink consistency differs. So it could be fraud? Marcus asked. It could be, she said gently. But proving that depends on access to the original documents, not just your photos. We'd need to see the hard copies. I thought about the drawer, the lock, the envelope with the county seal. I know where they are, I said softly. Ms. Harrington nodded. Then retrieving those originals legally is important. She paused, then added. And let me be very clear, using someone's previous signature without their explicit permission is illegal. Even if the person believes they're protecting themselves. Even if they believe they're entitled to the property. I felt a tremor run through me. Even if it's a family member? Marcus asked quietly. She looked at him with a sad sort of understanding. Especially then. The rest of the meeting was filled with explanations, legal rights, next steps, how to gather evidence properly, what to expect if things escalated. I tried my best to absorb it all, but the words blurred around the edges. Fraud. Forgery. Misrepresentation. Title reversal. Violations. Each one felt like a blow. When we finally walked out of the office, the hallway seemed too bright. The air too thin. My head buzzed. Marcus reached for my hand. You okay? No, I said honestly. But I will be. We walked slowly to the car. Once inside, he sat in silence for a long moment before turning on the engine. Then he said, almost to himself, I can't believe she did this. I leaned back, exhaustion settling into my bones. Marcus, she didn't just do it to me. She did it to both of us. She just blamed me for her own guilt. He clenched the steering wheel. I'm going to talk to her, he said, voice low. No, I said quickly. Not yet. Not until we're ready. Not until we know exactly what we're going to say. He stared at the dashboard. She's my mother. And you're her son, I replied softly. But you're my husband, too. And what she did has consequences. You need time to let this sink in. He ran a hand through his hair. She's going to be furious when she finds out we saw the papers. I know. He looked at me suddenly. Did she do this because of you? Or because of me? The question hit deep. She did it because of fear, I said gently. But she projected it onto me. Because it was easier than confronting the fact that her own son was growing up, making a life, and sharing a future she wasn't fully in control of. Those words landed like truth. He exhaled shakily. I always thought she wanted what was best for me. She does, I said softly. But sometimes wanting what's best gets twisted into wanting what she can control. We drove back to the hotel in heavy silence. The air between us wasn't angry, just weighed down by everything we'd discovered. When we got inside the room, I sat on the bed and stared at the carpet. Marcus sat beside me. What happens now? He asked. We gather proof, I said. We confront her together. And then? I hesitated. And then we decide where we go from here. His breath caught. You're not thinking of leaving me, are you? I shook my head and squeezed his hand. No, Marcus. I'm thinking of us leaving her. Relief softened his shoulders. But Marcus, I added carefully, we have to talk about something else. He looked at me, wary. If your mother is capable of doing this, I said quietly, then there's more she's capable of. And you need to decide who you want to be in this story. His eyes glistened. He nodded, understanding more deeply than words could express. A soft knock at the door broke our moment. We froze. Another knock. Louder. Marcus stood slowly, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. His face drained of color. He turned toward me, voice barely a whisper. "It's her." My heart thudded once. Hard. He didn't open the door. She knocked again, her voice muffled but sharp. "Marcus. I know you're in there. Open this door." He shook his head, stepping back. "Marcus," she called again, her tone rising, "open this door right now. We need to talk." No. She needed to control. She needed to get ahead of the truth. She needed to shut down whatever she believed we had discovered. "Don't," I whispered. He swallowed, torn. Her voice rose sharper. "Marcus, I'm your mother. Open this door." He moved closer to me instead. I took his hand. We stayed still. Her knocks grew louder, faster, angrier. Then suddenly, they stopped. Silence. For a long moment, neither of us breathed. And when the hallway was finally quiet again, Marcus sank to the floor, his back against the door, his face buried in his hands. "I never thought she'd do something like this," he whispered. "Never." I knelt beside him, resting my forehead against his shoulder. "Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from enemies," I said softly. "Sometimes it comes from the people who think they're protecting themselves." Outside the door, her shadow lingered for a moment. Then her footsteps faded away down the hallway. But both of us knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We didn't speak for nearly an hour after she left the hallway. Marcus sat on the floor with his back against the door, his hands resting loosely over his knees, staring at nothing. His breathing was shallow, like someone trying to convince themselves not to panic. I sat beside him, leaning against the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of silence pressing against my chest. When he finally lifted his head, the pain in his eyes startled me. "She's never yelled like that," he whispered, voice barely there. "Not at me. Not at anyone." I took a slow breath. "Marcus, she's scared. And when people are scared, when they feel cornered, they lash out." He shook his head, confused. "But she wasn't cornered, She was," I said softly. "Not by us. By her own guilt." He looked away, swallowing hard. "What if she does something worse? What if she tries to ruin us? What if she—" I reached over and touched his hand gently. "Hey. We're not alone anymore. We know the truth now. That's our protection." He nodded slowly, but the fear didn't leave his eyes. The rest of the morning passed in a strange kind of quiet. We didn't leave the room. We didn't even open the curtains. The hotel was so still that the sound of housekeeping knocking down the hall sounded like thunder. Marcus checked the peephole twice, as if expecting her to come back. She didn't. But the tension she left behind lingered like smoke. By afternoon, the attorney had emailed us requesting scans of any additional documents we might find. I forwarded the photos immediately, fingers trembling as I typed. Marcus paced the room in tight, restless steps. Finally he stopped, rubbing his temples. "I need to talk to her," he muttered. "I can't sit here and let this break everything." I stood and faced him. "Marcus, listen to me. If you talk to her now, she's going to twist things. She's going to emotionally corner you before you walk through the door. She's my mother," he murmured, almost defending her but without conviction. "Yes," I said gently. "And she knows how to reach you. Push your buttons. Make you feel guilty. Turn everything around." He didn't deny it. "Wait until we know our rights," I said. "Until we have legal clarity. Until we understand exactly how she used our signatures, and why." "I don't want to fight her," he whispered. "You're not fighting her," I said, taking his hand again. "You're drawing boundaries. There's a difference." He inhaled slowly, shakily. "She won't like that. She doesn't have to," I answered. But she does have to respect it. For the first time, he didn't argue. Around 5 o'clock, we got another email from Ms. Harrington. I opened it immediately. She had reviewed the paperwork more closely. The transfer of title was valid on its face, meaning the county had no reason to question the signatures. Which meant undoing it would require proof of manipulation. But the attorney said something else that made my skin prickle. The timing of the transfer mattered. Legally. Because the paperwork had been filed after we'd moved in, after we'd begun contributing to the household, after we'd made improvements to the property, after we'd paid bills. Those contributions meant something. Not all is lost, the attorney wrote. But you need more evidence of intent. Something showing this transfer was planned before the conflict occurred. My heart beat faster. The note in her drawer. The annotations on the will. The clipped message with my name replaced. The older documents she'd kept as versions of her plans. She'd been preparing for this far longer than we knew. Marcus, I said quietly, showing him the email, we have to go back. He looked at me, startled. Back? Back to the house? Yes, I whispered. There's more in that drawer. More papers. More proof. If we can find what she wrote, things she planned, things she crossed out, we can show the attorney. He swallowed. She'll kill us if she finds out. She won't be there in the morning, I said. She always leaves early on Saturdays for her grocery shopping. Every week. Without fail. But if she catches us, we won't be caught. He hesitated, torn between fear and necessity. He looked so much like himself at 15, not 32, unsure, trying to be brave, trying to step out from a shadow that had shaped him all his life. I need to do this with you, he said finally. A quiet relief washed through me. Then we do it together, I said. That night, neither of us slept well. I kept imagining the lock turning, the key sliding into the drawer, the feel of cold metal against my fingertips. I knew we needed to move carefully. Not recklessly. Not out of anger, though anger simmered underneath everything now, but out of clarity. Before dawn cracked through the sky, we left the hotel. The streets were still, the air heavy with the kind of hush that only comes before sunrise. The cab we took dropped us off 2 blocks from her house, just in case she looked out the window. We walked quietly, hand in hand, our breath visible in the cool morning air. The house looked the same from the outside. Calm. Ordinary. Harmless. You'd never guess how much pain it had swallowed in the last few months. I pulled the key from my pocket. Marcus watched nervously as I slid it into the lock. It turned with the same soft, permissive click as before. We stepped inside. The air smelled exactly like yesterday, lavender and leftover grease, but something felt different. Heavier. Like the house knew we weren't supposed to be there. Marcus closed the door gently behind us. Okay, he whispered. Let's be quick. I nodded. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as we walked down the hall. The door to her bedroom was still slightly ajar. When we pushed it open, the room looked untouched. Bed made. Curtains drawn. Everything neat. But my stomach tightened. Her desk drawer was slightly open. Just an inch. But it was open. Marcus noticed too. She was in here last night, he whispered. I nodded slowly. She went through something. We shared a look filled with fear and urgency. I knelt in front of the drawer and pulled it gently. It slid open faster than I expected. The neat stacks of paper weren't neat anymore. Her notes, handwritten, folded, annotated, were scattered. Some pushed to the side. Some crumpled. Some missing. She knew. She knew we'd seen the papers. She'd been trying to hide the rest. My heart pounded as I sifted through the drawer, searching for anything she hadn't managed to remove. Marcus hovered beside me, breathing unevenly. I found the old will. The scribbles. The crossed-out names. The sticky notes. But the most important envelope, the one with the clipped note, was gone. She took it, I whispered. Marcus clenched his fists. Damn it. My hands moved faster, searching deeper. I found receipts, bank statements, a notebook of expenses. But the envelope with her written intention, the one that said protect house from them, was gone. She knew that note would implicate her, I said. She took the one thing that showed her motives. Then we're screwed, Marcus whispered. No, I said firmly. We are not. Because as I reached deeper into the drawer, my fingers brushed the edge of something stiff, a thin folder pressed against the back panel. I pulled it out. Inside were drafts, older drafts, of the title transfer. Some dated months before we moved in. Some with corrections in her handwriting. Some with marginal notes like, remove her name. Don't mention to Marcus yet. Finalize when she depends more. Not ready. My breath caught. When she depends more. This was planned. This was premeditated. This was a long game. I snapped pictures quickly, knowing we didn't have much time. Then, unexpectedly, a soft sound came from the living room. Marcus and I froze. A floorboard creaked. Then another. He looked at me, pale as paper. She's home, he whispered. My pulse spiked so fast I nearly dropped the folder. Marcus grabbed my arm. Closet. Now. We rushed to the closet, slipped inside, and closed the door silently. My breathing was shallow. His hand found mine in the dark. And then we heard her voice, drifting down the hallway. I know you're here. A cold chill crawled down my spine. We're not doing this, Marcus whispered. We're not hiding like kids. Before I could stop him, he squeezed my hand once and pushed the closet door open. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom, grocery bags sitting forgotten on the floor behind her. Her face wasn't angry this time. It was disappointed. Wounded. And something else, a sharp pride that made her jaw tighten. So this is what you've become, she said softly. Sneaking into my home. Digging through my things. I stepped out of the closet slowly. Marcus stood beside me. You left us no choice, I said carefully. There is always a choice, she replied coldly. Marcus stepped forward. Ma, why did you do it? She didn't blink. Because it's my house. Not yours. Not hers. Mine. And you lied to us, he said, his voice cracking. You lied to me. You lied to my wife. I protected what's mine, she answered sharply. At our expense, I whispered. She looked at me then, really looked, and her eyes hardened. You were never supposed to have anything of mine. The words hit like a slap. Marcus inhaled sharply. How could you say that? Because, she whispered, her voice trembling with fury, I watched my son start to slip away. I watched him choose you over me. I watched him build a life I wasn't part of. And I wasn't going to lose the only thing I had left. Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then she added something that sliced through the room. You can take him. But you will not take my home. Marcus stepped back. Ma. No, she snapped. You betrayed me the moment you brought her into my house. My chest tightened. This was never about the house, I said quietly. It was about control. She stared at me with a cold, quiet hatred I had never seen before. Get out, she said softly. Both of you. And don't come back. Marcus's jaw tightened. If that's how it has to be, okay. She flinched, as if she hadn't expected him to choose me. And just like that, the line was drawn. The three of us stood there in a room filled with secrets, betrayal, and truths none of us wanted to face. And in that broken silence, something in Marcus changed. Something in me changed. Something in her hardened forever. We left the house without another word. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something new tug at my chest. Not fear. Not confusion. But the faintest spark of freedom. When we stepped out of her house that morning, the air felt strangely different. The same street. The same cracked sidewalk. The same uneven fence belonging to the neighbor across the way. But something had shifted. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for months lifted just enough for me to take a full breath. Marcus closed the door behind us without looking back. He held the knob for a second longer than necessary, like his fingers didn't want to let go of the metal, of the history, of the boyhood years he'd left inside. Then he released it and came down the steps slowly. We walked to the curb without speaking. At the corner, I finally turned to look at him. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes red-rimmed. He wasn't crying, but the sadness sat right there under his skin. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He let out a short, humorless breath. "No. Are you?" "No," I said, just as softly. We stood there with our honesty hanging between us like a fragile thread. "But we will be," I added. And for the first time, I actually believed it when I said it. We didn't go straight back to the hotel. Instead, we ended up at a small diner a few blocks away, the kind of place with sticky tables and laminated menus and a faint smell of syrup that never really leaves. The waitress greeted us with a tired smile and poured coffee into chipped mugs without asking. We sat in a booth by the window, hands wrapped around the warm cups like they were anchors. Marcus stared into his coffee for a long time. "I never thought she'd say it out loud," he murmured. "What?" "That she'd rather lose me than share anything with you." I looked at him, my throat tightening. "She didn't say she'd rather lose you." He shook his head. "She told me I betrayed her by choosing you." "That's the same thing." I could tell it hurt him in a different way, deep in a place only mothers and sons can reach. The waitress came back, took our order, pancakes for him, toast for me, though I knew neither of us had much appetite. When she walked away, the silence slipped back in. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He frowned. "For what?" "For being the reason everything came to the surface. For being the excuse she used to do what she was already planning. For being the one she decided to blame." He looked up sharply. "You are not the reason she's like this. You didn't create this in her. You just exposed it. She was always going to struggle with letting me go. If it wasn't about a house, it would have been something else." I let his words sink in. "She thinks I stole you," I said. "She thinks I gave myself," he corrected gently. "And she's struggling with that." The pancakes arrived, butter slowly melting into the fluffy stack, syrup glistening in the breakfast light. We picked at our food, neither of us eating much, but the act of chewing gave us something to do with our mouths when our hearts were too full. "What now?" he finally asked. "We send the photos to Ms. Harrington," I said. "We tell her what we found, what she said, what she removed, what she left behind. We ask her what's worth pursuing and what isn't." "And my mom," he whispered. I thought for a moment, choosing my words carefully. "We give her space," I said. "Not as punishment. As protection. For us." He nodded slowly. "She's going to tell people her version." "I know. They'll think we're ungrateful," he added. "They'll think we used her." "Some of them will," I said. "Some won't. But the people who love you, really love you, they'll ask what happened before they choose a side." He stared out the window, watching cars pass by. Church folks aren't always like that. I couldn't argue with him there. Later that afternoon, back at the hotel, we wrote everything down. Every conversation. Every date. Every strange comment she'd made. Every piece of paper we'd seen. Every phrase burned into our memory, including that small note in her handwriting. "Protect house from them," even though we no longer had it in our hands. We wrote until our hands ached. Then we sent everything to Ms. Harrington. The days that followed felt like standing in the doorway between two rooms, one behind us full of hurt and confusion, one ahead of us still dark and unknown. His mother didn't come back to the hotel again, but she called Marcus. A lot. At first he ignored her calls. Then, one afternoon, after letting it ring for the 5th time, he sighed and handed the phone to me. "Here. You read it." She had sent a long message, paragraphs of words that had clearly been crafted, maybe rehearsed, maybe written and edited 3 times before sending. She painted herself as a frightened older woman. She said she'd acted out of fear, out of desperation, out of concern. She blamed outsiders for putting ideas in our heads. She never once mentioned the forged signature. She never once acknowledged the drawers we'd found or the drafts she'd hidden. To her, we had broken her trust by going through her things. It was a story. Not the truth. Not exactly a lie. Just her version. She ended the message with, "One day you'll understand what I did for you. Until then, I forgive you." I felt something inside me harden at that. "She forgives us," I said flatly, handing the phone back. Marcus stared at the words on the screen for a long moment, then locked the phone and set it face down on the table. "I don't think she knows what forgiveness actually means," he said quietly. Our next meeting with Ms. Harrington was calmer. She had gone through all the new images, notes, and context we'd provided. She explained that, yes, there were grounds for a challenge. But it would be long, expensive, emotionally draining. It would likely burn what little remained of the relationship with his mother. At the end, she said something that surprised me. "You need to ask yourselves," she said, "what matters more, winning this house, or reclaiming your future? Sometimes the law can fix paper, but it can't heal the heart." On the drive back, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. Finally, Marcus broke it. "What do you want?" he asked. The question hung there, bigger than the car. "I want us to be safe," I said. "Emotionally, mentally, financially. I want us to start a life that doesn't depend on someone else's moods. I want to live somewhere that isn't tied to someone else's fear." He nodded. "So, not that house." I looked out the window. "I don't think there's a version of us staying in that house that doesn't end with more hurt." He swallowed. "And you?" I asked him. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a long time. "I wanted to inherit that house one day," he admitted. "Not because it's big or fancy. Just because it's home. It's where my dad lived, where I grew up, where every memory is." I watched his profile, the way his jaw worked, the way his eyes shone. "But now," he said finally, "when I think of that house, I don't just see my dad in the hallway anymore. I see her standing there, telling you that you were never supposed to have anything of hers." I hear the way she said it. He took a deep breath. "And I don't want to live inside a place built on that sentence." A bittersweet relief washed through me. It hurt to hear him let go of his childhood dream. But it also meant he was choosing something else, something bigger. He was choosing us. In the weeks that followed, we let the legal side settle into the background. We didn't forget it, we just refused to let it consume us. With Ms. Harrington's help, we filed a formal notice disputing the way the document had been executed, not necessarily to take the house back, but to put something on record. A line in the system that said, this was not done honestly. It wouldn't change his mother's choices, but it would mean her version wouldn't be the only story attached to that address. Beyond that, we shifted our energy towards something we hadn't focused on in a long time, building our own life. I got a job first, not at a dental clinic, but at a small community health center downtown. The receptionist there was retiring. They needed someone who knew how to deal with people in pain without making them feel like they were a problem. I figured I had plenty of practice with that. The first morning I walked into that building, the smell of antiseptic and coffee greeted me. The waiting room chairs squeaked. The printer jammed twice. The phone rang off the hook. But when a nervous mother came in with a crying toddler and I was able to calm her with a soft tone and a gentle smile, I felt something inside me straighten. I still knew how to hold space for others. I hadn't lost that. A month later, Marcus switched shifts at his job and took on extra hours. We sat down together and built a budget from scratch, one that didn't rely on anyone else's generosity or threats. It wasn't glamorous. We rented a small, slightly run-down apartment with unreliable heating and thin walls that let us hear the neighbors' arguments and late-night television. The pantry wasn't always full. The furniture didn't match. But every time I turned the key in our front door, my chest swelled with a quiet, fierce kind of pride. This place didn't belong to his mother, or my fears, or anyone's control. It belonged to our effort, our sacrifice, our choice. People talk. That's something you can't avoid. Word got around, as we knew it would. At church, people took sides in whispers. A few women approached me with soft eyes and heavy sighs. "You know your mother-in-law's been through a lot," they'd say. "She's just scared of ending up alone." "I understand," I would reply. And I did. I truly did. But fear doesn't excuse everything. They didn't always know what to say after that. Others, more quietly, would squeeze my hand and say, "I heard what happened. I'm sorry. Don't let this make you bitter, okay?" Sometimes, after service, I'd feel her eyes on me from across the room. She started sitting on a different pew. Started volunteering more. Started talking loudly about how young people these days didn't respect elders, didn't honor sacrifices, didn't value family. Marcus stopped going for a while. It hurt him too much. The sideways glances. The pity. The pressure to reconcile when no one really knew what had been done. I kept going, on and off, not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone, but because I refused to let this one story define my entire connection to faith or community. There was one Sunday, months later, that I won't forget. I was standing by the coffee table after service, holding a styrofoam cup, when I noticed her standing in the doorway of the fellowship hall. She looked smaller somehow. Older. Her shoulders weren't as straight as they'd been that morning on the porch. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. She didn't look away as fast as before. Her gaze softened, just a fraction. Enough for me to see the weariness behind it. Enough for me to recognize that as much as she had hurt us, she was living with something heavy too. Guilt is its own kind of prison. She didn't approach me. I didn't approach her. The space between us remained full of everything that had been said and done. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger when I looked at her. I felt distance. A sad sort of acceptance. On the ride home, Marcus asked, "Was she there?" "Yes," I said. He stared out the window. "How did she look?" "Tired," I answered. He nodded once. We didn't say more. Time passed. Slowly, quietly, the rawness faded. The legal dispute settled into something of a stalemate. Ms. Harrington advised us that pursuing it aggressively might win us a technical victory, but the cost, in money, time, and emotional energy, would be enormous. In the end, we chose to let it rest. We didn't get the house back. We didn't get the title reversed. She kept her home. But we got something else. We got the chance to build a new one. Not just with walls and doors and roofs, but within ourselves. A home built with boundaries instead of fear. With mutual respect instead of obligation. With truth instead of secrets. There came a day, nearly a year later, when we stood in front of a small, slightly crooked duplex with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The real estate agent handed us a stack of papers, smiled, and said, "Congratulations. It's all yours now. Our first home. Not big. Not fancy. But ours." The pen felt steady in my hand as I signed my name on those papers. No hidden pages. No repurposed signatures. No half-truth explanations. Everything was clear. Everything was honest. As we stepped inside that house for the first time, the air smelled like dust and possibility. Marcus walked into the tiny living room and spun in a slow circle, eyes bright. "It needs work," he said. "So did we," I replied with a small smile. "We turned out okay." He laughed softly and pulled me into a hug. I leaned into his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I'm proud of us," I whispered. "Me too," he said. Sometimes, late at night, when the house creaks and the wind rattles the windows and the refrigerator hums too loudly, I lie in bed and think about her. About the way she pressed that sunflower key into my hand. About the way she locked the door. About the papers she filed behind my back, using my name like a tool. About the note she wrote, fearful and possessive. About the words she threw at me, "You were never supposed to have anything of mine." And somewhere in the middle of all that, I think about how scared she must have been. How lonely. How desperate to hold on to something she recognized as hers when everything else around her seemed to shift. I don't excuse what she did. I don't forget it. But I've learned to release it. Forgiveness, I've realized, isn't about saying, "It's okay." It's about saying, "I won't carry this anymore." The key she gave me, I still have it. Not because it opens anything now. She changed the locks long ago, I'm sure. I keep it in a little box on my nightstand, the sunflower charm slightly faded, the edges worn smooth from all the times I clenched it in my fist. It doesn't remind me of rejection anymore. It reminds me of the day I realized that being locked out of someone else's house was the first step toward walking into my own. It reminds me that love without boundaries isn't love, it's control dressed up as sacrifice. It reminds me that sometimes the doors that close on you are the very ones that push you toward a life you never would have chosen, but one you desperately needed. And it reminds me of this: I didn't lose a home. I discovered I had the strength to build one. For myself. With my husband. On paper that no one manipulated, in a space no one could throw me out of, under a roof held up by more than just wood and nails, by honesty, partnership, and hard-earned trust. And strangely enough, sometimes when I think about her alone in that old house, I whisper a quiet prayer. Not that she regrets everything. Not that she begs us to come back. Just that one day, she finds a way to make peace with the choices she made. Because I already have. Sometimes life has a way of humbling you in places you thought were safe. Sometimes the people you trust the most turn out to be the ones who teach you the hardest lessons. Not because they're evil. Not because they're monsters. But because fear can twist the truth. Pride can cloud the heart. And love can turn into something sharp when someone feels it slipping away. I used to think being locked out of that house meant I'd lost something. A home. A place. A piece of security. But now, looking back on everything, I realize it was the moment God shifted me toward something better. A space that belonged to me. A life I could build without someone holding the door open just long enough to close it again. Some doors shut because they're meant to. Some people release you because they can't grow with you. And some betrayals, as painful as they feel, are really just redirections. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. And if she called me tomorrow and said she needed help, I would show up with the same heart I've always had. But I wouldn't walk back into the same place expecting it to be different. I learned my lesson. My home, my peace, can't depend on someone else's permission. And if you've ever been pushed out of somewhere you thought you belonged, let me tell you gently, maybe you didn't lose a place. Maybe you were being guided toward a better one. One where your presence isn't questioned. One where your love isn't inspected. One where your worth isn't debated behind closed doors. So let me ask you. If you were in my shoes, standing outside that locked door with a key that no longer meant anything, what would you have done?